It is a pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm deeply appreciative of the opportunity to stand in your august pulpit. I thank your ministers, Reverends Daniel, Beth, and Aaron, for their hospitality. Don and the musicians have my special gratitude. It's not often I get to preach to a congregation with such a dynamic jazz band. Collaborating with your staff and your musicians has reminded me that while I may prepare my sermon alone, worship and indeed ministry is a collective act. Now, Texas is a long way from Cambridge, and it is a particular honor to be able to share the service with Reverend Daniel. It's only a couple of months ago that we had lunch at Harvard Divinity School. Daniel told me something of your congregation's dynamic spirit, history, and powerful work for social justice. He also shared with me his project on the ministry of the Reverend Robert Rabel. And so it's wonderful to have the opportunity to experience your congregation in person. In somewhat dated and gendered language, the Reverend Rabel provided words that might summarize the major message of today's sermon. He wrote, "The primary concern of Unitarians is life on earth, improving it, perfecting it, more nearly achieving the potentialities and satisfactions which all men are capable of realizing." Now, those words were written in the 1950s. Today, we might cast them slightly differently as Unitarian Universalist congregations can and do play a vital role in birthing a better world and in unleashing the full potential of the human spirit. To get us started on a consideration of this claim, I want to ask you a simple question. Do you believe in magic? I do. And by magic, I mean nothing more than the act of creating something from nothing. Some years ago, my friend Richard taught me about it. Now, Richard is a distinguished medical doctor and an HIV researcher. He's not exactly the sort of person I would think of as a proponent of magic. Yet he explained it to me this way. Colin, magic is imagining something that does not exist and then bringing that thing into being. It's simple. Imagine that I am hungry and I want a sandwich. Do not have one, so I'm going to make one. I get a couple of pieces of nice rye bread, a bit of sharp cheese, some oily tuna, a few capers, a little mayonnaise, and pretty soon I have a sandwich. I used my imagination to create something that did not exist before in the world, a delicious sandwich. Richard's sandwich is a simple illustration of an incredibly powerful force, the human imagination. The ability to imagine something that does not exist and then bring that thing into being is one of the greatest of human talents. It is a magical act. This kind of magic will no doubt be fully on display this week at Mardi Gras. The brilliant floats, lively music, colorful costumes all blend together to form an exuberant spirit. The placement of each sequin, each feather, the sound of horns fluid over drums, the stampeding of feet, all imagined and then brought into the being of celebration, the magic of imagination unleashed. Magic is not just found in the streets during Mardi Gras. It is something we nurture in our Unitarian Universalist congregations. I like to think about church that way, as a place where we can make magic happen. In our liberal religious communities, we collectively imagine things or social arrangements that do not presently exist, and then we bring those things into being. This imaginative act of bringing something into being is not the only kind of magic to be found in Unitarian Universalist congregation. There's another kind of magic, the magic of becoming deeply attuned to the wonder that surrounds us. The world is a pretty amazing place. The spaces between the jagged edges of jazz notes, the uneven, never duplicated, unfolding shapes of papery green moss, the tactile sensation of hand upon hand that we call fellowship, the carpeted twinkles that form the infinity of the sky's dark, the strange moments when history breaks and the impossible suddenly becomes what is, the regular rhythm of kitchen chores, sharp knives upon crisp vegetables. There is such deep wonder and awe to be encountered on this muddy blue ball of a planet we call Earth. One of the earliest ways I learned about this, that the world is already filled with magic, was through my favorite children's author, Daniel Pinkwater. You heard of him? He used to be a regular contributor on NPR. And I've been reading a lot of Pinkwater lately. So I have a 10-year-old son, and it turns out that one of the best things about being a parent is that you get to go back to the children's books that you loved as a child. And now my son loves Pinkwater, and so over the last couple years, we've probably read a dozen of his books. They have really great titles like The Snark-Out Boys and the Avocado of Death, and Alan Mandelson, The Boy from Mars, or Yob Gorgle, The Mystery Monster of Lake Ontario. Reading these books as an adult, I have realized that they all have a common theme. The world is filled with magic. The trick is finding it. And finding it does not actually turn out to be that difficult. Just a matter of perceiving things around you differently. When you do, you start to notice amazing things that you haven't noticed before. Take The Snark-Out Boys and the Avocado of Death. It tells the story of three friends who snark out, that's sneak out of the house late at night to go to the movie theaters when their parents aren't paying attention. They do not go to just any movie theater. They go to the Snark Theater. It's a 24-hour movie theater that shows all kinds of movies, everything from the latest blockbusters to obscure foreign and independent films like Vampires in a Deserted Seaside Hotel at the End of August, or The Invasion of the Bagaloids. That last one is supposed to be about rock-hard, intelligent bagels from outer space who come to attack the Earth. The Snark is not just a movie theater, it's a way of life. Going there allows the kids to enter into a world that they would have never encountered otherwise. They learn the finer points of soapboxing, that's speaking on a street corner, amid a medley of hipsters, impassioned political activists, and the militantly religious. They meet Captain Shep Nesterman, a famous street artist with an elaborate routine that features Dharmawati, the dancing chicken. The chicken lives under Nesterman's hat when the two are not performing. The kids even collaborate with the world's greatest detective to solve a case. Now, none of this is their creation. The magical world that the three friends entered into already existed. They only had to find it. They just had to open themselves to the world that surrounded them, and then there it was. Most people and places in the novel, incidentally, are fictionalized versions of people and places in 1950s Chicago. The Snark Theater was based on the Julian Theater, a small theater noted for its screenings of Scandinavian language films. There was actually a street artist in Chicago with a performing chicken. Chicken Charlie traveled around the city with a white rooster perched upon his hat. The world is filled with wonder. We can imagine new social combinations and things that have never existed before and then bring them into being. Unitarian Universalist congregations are places where both kinds of magic can happen. The readings I chose for this morning spoke to these different kinds of magics. There are few more famous passages in all of American letters, of course, than Martin King's speech, I Have a Dream. It contains a bold vision that this country's history of white supremacy can be overcome. The speech was a profoundly imaginative act, one that comes as close to the definition of magic that we've been using as I can envision. King wanted to dream into existence a racially and economically just world. His words express the dream of millions who similarly longed for a country that lived out the true meaning of its creed. The civil rights movement, of which King was a part, did much to make some of the dream he expressed a reality. Exactly how that beautiful movement accomplished what it did, and precisely what it accomplished is, of course, beyond the scope of my Sunday sermon. But the important point is this. Collectively, civil rights workers imagined that the world could be different, and it became so. Magic. Now, before we get to Nikki Giovanni, let me say this. Imagining that the world can be different is an acknowledgement that the world has changed over time. The social structures, the economic institutions, even the very categories we use to define each other have been imagined into being. We can imagine new ways of being together in the world. Now take race, that seemingly intractable, ever-present, ever-contested reality that kings dreamed could be overcome when the sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners sat down together at the table of brotherhood. What if I were to tell you that race was something that had been imagined into being, that it did not exist as a natural category in the world, but was something that we humans created? If we ask any honest scientist, they will tell us that race has no genetic basis in reality. If you ask any honest historian, they will tell us that race is a social construction, and that it's even possible to pinpoint the precise moments when race, as we think of it, came into being. The idea that black people and white people are somehow different races begins precisely on August 8th, 1444. That was the day that Prince Henry of Portugal arrived at the port of Lagos in Portugal with a human cargo of 235 African slaves. Until that moment, humans with black flesh had not been described by European thinkers as inherently different or inferior to humans with paler colored flesh by European thinkers. The arrival of a large group of slaves to the African continent marks the beginning of the European idea of racial difference. And it's followed by other moments that we can identify. There's 1662, when Virginia passed a law that race was a legal category that someone inherited from their mother. There's 1787, when the United States Constitution was adopted with its infamous 3/5 clause. There's the 1857 Dred Scott case, when the United States Supreme Court decided that no black person could be a citizen. All of these acts created that imagined category of race. They happened long before the oldest amongst us was born. That means it can be very easy to forget that race is a human creation. And yet King and others in the civil rights movement form part of a tradition that fought to reimagine this human construct. Like the abolitionists before them and Black Lives Matter after them, they were able to envision a day when the racial barriers that had been constructed intentionally could be intentionally deconstructed, when every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, and the rough places shall be made plain. Then I awoke and dug that if I dreamed natural dreams of being a natural woman, doing what a woman does when she's natural, I would have a revolution. The emphasis of Nikki Giovanni's revolutionary dreams is somewhat different than King's I Have a Dream. It speaks to that second kind of magic, the magic of becoming aware of what already is. The revolution which Giovanni dreams of is a revolution in which she is freely able to be who she is, a natural woman doing what a woman does when she's natural. Giovanni has been called the poet of the Black Revolution. The revolution which she imagined includes the dream of liberation from white supremacy, but it also includes cultivating awareness and appreciation for the richness of what is, the wonder that surrounds us. A line in one of her most famous poems runs, "Black love is black wealth." It is offered in defiance to those racists who want to cast life in the black community she grew up in as anything other than beautiful. It, like revolutionary dreams, is a call to remember that there is profound beauty to be found on who we already are and discovering what is around us. Magic. Dreaming a new world into being, opening ourselves to the wonder that surrounds us. There's a way in which we tap into both kinds of these kinds of magic by changing ourselves. It's a little bit like my friend Richard's sandwich. If you want a sandwich, you have to make it. If you want to live in a different world, you have to start by engaging the world differently. One of the best places to do this is in a Unitarian Universalist congregation. It's not very long ago that same-sex marriage was illegal, and the idea of marriage equality seemed a fanciful dream. I'm just old enough to remember when it seemed that every member of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer communities in my hometown was in the closet, or at least in the closet almost everywhere except for in our Unitarian Universalist congregation. In my congregation growing up, we had a diversity of sexual orientations and gender identities. Through religious education and in my youth group, I was taught that honoring this diversity made our community a freer and more loving place, one in which we could bring the fullness of who we were in a way that was not possible in many other spaces. The same was true of the congregation that I served in Cleveland, Ohio. Now, Cleveland is a somewhat culturally conservative place. We were the only religious community in our neighborhood that performed same-sex unions. Same-sex marriage was then illegal in Ohio, but we believed in marriage equality. We believed in celebrating a diversity of sexual orientations and gender identities. I remember clearly one celebration we did. It was for a couple who lived in the neighborhood. The two women did not attend the congregation. I never saw them on Sunday morning, but one day they came up and knocked on our front door. They were very much in love. They wanted to know if we would do a service to bless their union, to honor their love. Now, they came from very conservative families. They told everyone that they lived together as roommates, but they were able to share their beautiful truth with us. And so we organized a service in the sanctuary where they could commit to each other and sanctify their bond. The only people who came to the service were members of the congregation. And afterwards, the women told me how deeply blessed and appreciative they felt. And we were just one of hundreds of Unitarian Universalist congregations across the United States that did similar things, performed same-sex unions when same-sex marriage was illegal. But here's the secret. In our congregations, we lived as if same-sex marriage was already legal. We lived as if it was perfectly normal for there to be families with 2 dads and 2 moms, just as we lived if it was perfectly normal for there to be families with single parents or a couple of heterosexual parents. And we did this because we did this, we helped create a world in which it was possible to celebrate many kinds of families and many kinds of partnerships. This is how social change happens. A group of people imagine that the world can be different, and then they act as if the world is different. That is, they open themselves to the wonderful fullness of human existence, and then the world changes. It's how we make our dreams tangible. It's magic, and we can do this. This is something we can do in our congregations. This theology actually forms the collective foundation of Unitarian Universalism. Our tradition, as you probably know, has deep resonances with early Christianity. There were Unitarian and Universalist Christians long before Trinitarianism became the dominant tradition amongst Christian theologians. The primary image these early Christians embraced in their chapels was not the image of a crucified Jesus. It was paradise. Contemporary Unitarian Universalist Rebecca Parker has observed, in the early church, paradise was this world, permeated and blessed by the Spirit of God. Describing ancient churches, she writes, images of it captured the craggy, scruffy pastoral landscape, the orchards, the clear skies, sparkling mosaics in vivid colors captured the world's luminosity. Parker believes that the purpose of the early church was to create paradise here on our sun-blessed orb. And she thinks that our Unitarian Universalist congregations are at their best when our members embrace the beauty of our daily lives while challenging the world's powers and principalities. That is, she thinks the purpose of our religious communities is to push us to create paradise here on earth while opening ourselves to the marvels of the universe that already exist. Heaven can be found in this world wherever love prevails and the gifts of life are stewarded with reverence and respect, she tells us. This world is filled with an infinity of wonders. We can dream new things, new forms of social arrangements, into being. And we can do this together in our Unitarian Universalist congregations. What do you discover when you let yourself dream? How would you imagine the world to be different? When you open yourself to wonder, what do you find already surrounds you? What kind of magic would you make happen? Rather than answering these questions myself, I'd like to give you the last word. I invite you to turn to your neighbor and say, we can imagine the world is a different, better place. We can imagine that we can bring that world into being. We can make magic together. May it be so, and amen.